everyone, and welcome back to the PRODCAST, where we prod the sheep and beat the wolf. This is a special episode where we interview Philip Kulishov. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PRODCAST. And this is a special episode today. But before we get there, I just want to say special thanks to everyone who is here. We have had an incredible week on this show. Now, first off, my family and I were blessed. We were able to go down to Pennsylvania, to Lancaster, and we were able to go to several different denominational events that were a real blessing. And to all the people of Lancaster who maybe watched the show, who welcomed us into your home and who welcomed us to your church, what a glorious group of people you are. We're so thankful for you. And we're glad to be back to Massachusetts, glad to be back to our home. Also, we're going to be doing this interview today because I'm just now getting back. And next week, we're going to dive back into our Revelation series. But this week, we are going to do an interview. And I'm excited for you to hear the conversation that we had, because I think it's an important conversation and it was a fun conversation to have. So that's number two. Number three, as far as updates goes, we've had a wild week on this show. We went from a show that had 2,400 subscribers when I left to go to Pennsylvania to today, we're at 9,980 subscribers. By the time you watch this episode, we are going to be over 10,000 subscribers as a channel, and I can't even believe that. So I want to take a moment just to say thank you to every single person who saw our ad and watched. And I want to give you a heads up on how to approach this channel. This channel is about Christ, and it's about the hope that we have in Christ, biblically speaking. And a lot of what we do is eschatology related. Now, there's two things that you need to understand about eschatology. Number one, there's the things that are going to happen in our future, and there's the things that have already happened in the past. If you want to know where to begin with this channel, we have two major series that we've done so far. One is called A Practical Postmillennialism. Those are the things that I think are still in the future of the church. So watch that series. You'll learn from Genesis to Revelation what God is doing in the trajectory of redemption. You'll learn where this channel believes that the future is going. And I'll give you a sneak peek. We do not believe that the world crashes and burns. We believe that Jesus reigns supreme, that he is king over all, and that he will have dominion. So that's the first thing. We also believe that a lot of passages when it comes to eschatology are misunderstood. There's many passages like Matthew 24, the book of Revelation, Daniel, even 1 Thessalonians 4, which we'll be talking about next week, are wildly misunderstood. And many people actually believe that these passages exist in the future when actually, historically, biblically, and all other ways, these passages have already occurred. If you want to understand how, for instance, wars and rumors of wars, or false messiahs, the Antichrist, the rapture, all of the things that you're used to hearing that are still going to happen in the future have actually happened in the past, then go and check out our Revelation series. Right now, we are going line by line through the book of Matthew, or through Matthew 24, and we're looking at how these things have already taken place. Eschatology is about future doctrines, but who are they future to? Are they future to you and I, or are they future to the men who heard Jesus say them in the first century? And we have to understand that if we're going to understand eschatology. So to the 7,000 or so subscribers who are brand new, welcome to the show. Welcome to a deep dive into the Bible. Welcome to a channel that is not afraid to say hard things and not afraid to teach deep things. And go check out those two series. You have plenty of content. And with that introduction, welcome to today's episode, where we're going to have an incredible interview. God bless you. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PRODCAST. I'm really excited this week because I don't think I mentioned this last week on the show, but I was traveling. I was gone down to Pennsylvania with my family for a denominational event. And in the midst of all of that, I was like, what am I going to do this week on the podcast? What are we going to talk about? Because I was so busy that week, wasn't able to even really think about an episode for the show. And then lo and behold, I get this email that really intrigued me, actually. Today, we're going to have a guest on. His name is Philip. And Philip, I should have asked you this before we even started. Tell me how to pronounce your last name, because I don't want to do that poorly.
Yeah, no problem. Kulishov.
Kulishov. Yeah, so I get this email, and it's introducing me to a guy who's thinking through a lot of interesting things with business and with finance, also interesting background. And I was just like, wow, this could be a really cool episode for this week. And even introduce me to another brother in Christ who's doing good work in the kingdom. So, Philip, this is really our first time meeting, other than the 2 minutes we had before we clicked record. So, man, why don't you start off? Just thank you for being on the show and tell us who you are and what the Lord's doing in your life and all of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Kendall, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I am a partner in a holding company. So there's 7 of us partners. Our company's called EBM Inc., so Efficient Business Machines. And what we do is we acquire, develop, and hold companies. And the idea there is to develop them into maturity and hold them long term, as opposed to churn and sell. So we're not really doing that to flip the company, but to be able to provide a home for business. And so business specifically is kind of what all that is about. And even specifically so, maybe the reason why we think that's important is going back even to the cultural mandate, the kingdom mandate, for us to be able to subdue the earth, take dominion, and be fruitful and productive. And connecting that even to the greatest commandment, to love God and love your neighbor. Merging all those things together, we think that business is not even a great avenue for that, but a necessary avenue in order to love your neighbor in a productive way, to be fruitful in that way. And so that's a lot of what that has transpired into. And so we own a few different businesses and are trying to develop that and be able to grow that sort of company.
That's so fascinating too, because I remember growing up. I grew up in a Christian culture, sort of nominally Christian for most of my childhood and young adult life, and then the Lord really grabbed a hold of me. And I remember in that early part of my Christian walk, how aestheticism was so like a part of my just even ethos or worldview or whatever you want to call it. Like, money is bad. Trying to make a lot of money or to have a legacy to give to your children. All of these things are abstractions at best from what the real work of the spiritual life and the gospel. And I just remember, like, even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, really, seeing how Gnostic that was and seeing how much good we can do for the kingdom of Christ, for our neighbor and our families, by being focused on things like this and having more business acumen. So I'm 41, and I feel like most of my life I was given a sort of Gnostic view of these things. So it's really encouraging, actually, to hear that's your focus.
Right. Yeah, I think it's for sure my kind of maybe circles being brought up in a similar sort of environment where I think good works ends up being defined only in a spiritual realm. And so when we were created for good works, we were saved for good works. Well, what are those good works? And so a lot of the times, us Christians define those only spiritually. And so either by evangelism or some kind of demonstration of our ethics, right? And so even when we participate kind of in the physical realm in the world out there, we do so as maybe a necessary neutrality or even necessary evil, where our real focus needs to be, on these sort of spiritual good works. So even in the realm of business, I'm thinking, I see this a lot where Christians pursue maybe business or work as a means to an end. So where their heart really is maybe in like missionary or some kind of church ministry. And so they're doing their business in order to fund some other kind of project outside of their business. Or they're maybe pursuing, their business in order to have opportunities for evangelism or ethics with their customers or employees or something else. But the business itself, the work that the business is doing, is not cared for. Again, it's a necessary neutrality at best. It's just a means to an end. And so, if God tells us to love God with all our heart, if Jesus is Lord over every square inch, then we ought to care about everything that he cares about, which is all of it, right? And so he's Lord not just of a spiritual realm, he's Lord over the entire cosmos. And so our approach, our interest and dominion taking ought to include all of that. That was originally what Adam was told to do. That is what Noah was told to do. That's what Christ saved us for. And so even good works in that way includes not just spiritual things, but the actual works themselves. So just a very maybe practical example from the Bible where Jesus talks about giving somebody a cup of cold water, right? He's not talking about it's good works if you do it maybe in the right tone or in the right approach, or when you do it for you to make sure you also use this as an opportunity to convert this person. Right. But just the fact of giving that cup of cold water is the good work itself. That is a demonstration of love. And so in the business context, I think it is inescapable to serve people because your whole point is to serve a customer. If there's one thing that you need in order to have a business, it is a customer, somebody to serve, somebody who cares about what you're doing enough to pay for it. And so if you don't care about that customer, if you're using that customer as a means to an end to get to somewhere else, then you're, I think, being unfaithful in your business endeavor. And so, again, defining good works as the actual thing. So if my customer wants me to build them a house, well, me building them a house is the good work that I'm doing for them, right? If they're buying some kind of manufactured part. So we one of our businesses is a construction company. We also do excavation. We have a welding shop, sheet metal shop, CNC machining shop. So these are different customers that are looking for different sorts of products. And we believe that the good work that we're doing for them are these products that they're after, that they're pursuing. That is not to be put into some kind of neutral category.
Right. That's so good too. And I'm really thankful that you brought that up because we have for many years used these sorts of things as means to an ends or necessary evils. The sort of classic example in my mind is in high school, I went to a Christian school. And I remember someone one day wore a shirt with the 3 Budweiser frogs sitting on the lily pads. But the tagline underneath the shirt was God's wiser instead of Budweiser. And I was just thinking to myself, like how stupid. And like as a kid, I thought that was so stupid and so cheesy and corny. It's like a vegan hot dog. You know, like they boil the carrot and they put it in the bun and you're like, it's a real hot dog. No, it's not. It's a Pinocchio hot dog. It's not real. Stop lying to yourself. Anyway, Christians for so long though have done that, and I think you're right because the work itself hasn't been the thing that's being focused on. It's just a means to an end. It's just a stepping stone to something else. It's a greater work, and because of that, we've looked cheesy, cliche, and all of these other things.
Right, exactly. We don't care about the actual thing, right? So doing the work itself doesn't really matter for us. We're just trying to get out of it, or when we're in it, we're plugging our nose. This is boring. This is not interesting. And I think there are different reasons why that is. Some of it, I think, is maybe theological or categorical. We don't have the right mental categories for it. We don't understand maybe what it means that Jesus cares about this stuff, that Jesus is Lord of all. Right. And so maybe it is some sort of theological shift that needs to happen. But in another sense, I also think there is a spiritual shift where if Jesus is actually Lord of it all, if he cares about this thing, then I'm supposed to care about it too. And that's actually much harder to do. Like I actually have to put in the effort to care about this thing. If my job is to weld products, well, I have to get good at welding. I have to build a good house. I have to run a solid business. And so then the results actually matter. I can't just brush them off. And that is difficult work. And so that, I think, puts a different level of responsibility that we are quick to shrug off. It's easier in some sense to say, well, these things are not important, so I could just not focus on them, as opposed to get right into them and get good at it. And I think also historically, I mean, we've seen periods of Christianity, the church in history, that did marvelous work in these sorts of fields. Science, art, all of this was advanced by Christians, by that Protestant work ethic.
Yeah.
And so that has been there, and it's people who understand what it means that Jesus cares about it, that He's Lord over it, and that I'm able to focus in and get good at this thing. I don't need to just dismiss it.
Yeah, that's so good. Now, another thing that intrigued me, just here in the introduction part of this, is your mom and dad, from the bio that I read, you guys fled communist Russia?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, I got to hear about this story, man. Tell me about this.
That's right. Yeah, if you have a couple hours. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think in my head, how do all these themes intersect? How does your high view of the Great Commission and the cultural mandate and your robust, it seems Protestant Christianity, and then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, where does that all germinate? And in your bio, it seems like it germinates in communist Russia. Now I'm really fascinated.
Yeah. Because I think that I was raised on the stories of atheistic secularism gone to the extreme, right? And so if it is Christ or chaos, well, my parents, my grandparents were in that realm of no Christ, only man, right? And so that sort of humanistic secularism was the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So my after the Soviet Union fell in 91, my parents came here. That's when I was born. So I was born here in America. So my parents, my grandparents, I grew up on their stories of what it looked like and what it meant. And so for them, even, it was somewhat of a shift to live in a Western country. So just little examples of, we were raised to never trust any sort of government official. All law enforcement is wicked. So that's the sort of category emerge that somebody coming out of the Soviet Union has. How can you be a Christian and in law enforcement? Well, because in the Soviet Union, the KGB agents would raid their underground churches to arrest all these Christians, right? So my mom's dad, my grandpa, sat in state prison for 12 years for his faith. So it was not 12 consecutive years; it was 4 separate terms, but totaling 12 years. And
this
so
is your grandpa?
My grandpa, that's right. Yep.
Was this under Stalin?
Nope, this was under Khrushchev and Brezhnev, and then even leading up right before Gorbachev as well. And so Stalin actually had the churches closed. So when Stalin took over after Lenin, he closed down the churches. Christianity was lawless. It was made illegal. Then part of the Yalta Convention with Churchill and Roosevelt, when they were negotiating with Stalin to give him Eastern Europe, one of the stipulations was that he had to reopen the churches. So coming out of World War II, the churches were reopened, but there was a condition that all churches had to register with the state. So they had to be state approved. And so a lot of Christians were excited about that, hey, we could come and worship as long as we get the state approval to open up our church. And there was a minority of Christians who were very wary of that. And so my grandpa was one of those. And so there was a lot of conversation, discussion at that time. This would have been in the early 50s of Romans 13 and what does it mean to submit to the government, the sphere of the church versus the sphere of the government. And this is why even, in 2020, when a lot of the conversations here in America were revolving around that, I just remember hearing these explanations to me as a little kid growing up. So these conversations had already happened in kind of my history that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And so my grandpa had 4 brothers. All of his other brothers were part of the registered churches, and there was a big disagreement even, and my grandpa ended up being part of the underground Russian church. So it was a minority group of the Russian Christians who went underground, and so he was one of the church leaders there. And then at that point, under Stalin, there were not really any strings attached or conditions to it. But under Khrushchev in the 60s, Khrushchev went out on TV and said something like, "We will show you the last Christian on TV by 1980."
Yeah.
And so he was aggressively against Christianity, and it was the propaganda was that Christians are American spies. And so there ended up becoming certain conditions on top of the registration. So there were not any kids allowed under 18 at church, no baptisms, and a government official had to oversee every church order.
That's incredible.
Right. And so that was there. And so at that point, all of the registered churches started to get persecuted as well.
So I want to be sensitive about this, but I'm super fascinated right now. So I want to be sensitive about what I'm about to say, but I have this opinion. Terrible century in world history, the 20th century. But I've ran across a number of I think 25 million. I've even heard as high as 30 million Christians were killed in Russia under either Stalin or afterwards. Why? And especially when we hear numbers like 6 million Jews, which is horrific. But why don't we hear about the Christians that were killed in greater number? A kind of genocide of Christianity in Russia is what you're saying. Like, why is that never mentioned? Is it because as Americans we sided with Russia and that's embarrassing? Or like I just don't understand how as a Christian I have not heard this until my 30s and 40s.
Right. Well, then the communist regime was killing all of their own people, not just Christians. So there were anybody who was some sort of a dissident was either taken to the gulags, the state prisons, or executed. Or even so, like Stalin in the early 30s just exterminated a third of Ukraine because they took the grain supply away. Right. So that was just a state-controlled decision. And so a third of the population there died. I think part of it is because Russia, in some sense, was maybe our allies, both World War I, World War II, so coming out of that sort of maybe agenda. But in another sense, a lot of that was actively suppressed, both coming from the Soviet Union regime out, and also the Western countries not wanting kind of to hear it. So under Khrushchev in the 60s, my grandpa was one of the ones who went to protest actively in the Capitol, and so that was his first arrest. I think 66, I think it was. And so his time during prison, my grandma, so they had 11 kids. And so on top of being a mom, she ran an organization. Translated means the relatives of the prisoners. And so it was mostly moms and wives who would write appeal letters and do legal work, both towards the Soviet regime and also trying to get the message out to the Western countries about what's actually happening. Right. And so that is a lot of work that they had to, that they experienced resistance with, where it was very hard to even get people to believe what was happening. And so, yeah, I think that sort of message never fully made it out. And then after the Soviet Union fell, the conversation was more on the economic side of it, communism versus capitalism versus the religious side of it. Communism is a religious ideology. You cannot have communism in a Christian worldview. By nature, it is atheistic. And so I think that sort of conversation not only was ignored, but actively suppressed as well, because there were also, and still are, those sort of communistic or socialistic agents in our government trying to drive it in that direction. So it's not to their advantage to maybe frighten people about the religious nature of communism.
So that leads me to another question, because I've lived in America my whole life, and things like the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition is things that atheists will always share as, this is why we can't believe in Christianity, because it's so wicked and so evil. And even if you accept, which I don't, the secular narrative of the Crusades and the Inquisition, that there was nothing redeemable at all that happened, which again, I don't accept that narrative. But it's a drop in an ocean compared to what communism has done and the amount of people they've killed and how much evil it's been. Why? I think you're right that because people in our country have flirted with communism, that story has been sort of muted. But I guess I just don't understand why we would have people in our country flirting with communism. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. I think that there's two big forces, maybe again spiritually, internally in our wicked hearts that drive to that direction. So apart from even refusing to bow the knee to Christ, right? So that's kind of maybe the overall big one. But to be more specific, I think to have a sense of entitlement, this sort of maybe in the layman's terms, a slave mentality, right? Where the system owns me, and so the system owes me. And so I don't need to worry about my own productivity. I belong to the system. And so when even, Paul writes to slaves about basically not having that sort of slave mentality, but work as unto the Lord, we have people who are not slaves, but still have that sort of work approach to their entire life. So I do think a lot of even like pagan Russians coming out of that sort of system have a really hard time understanding what it means to be productive because they're used to an entitled mindset. And so with government handouts here as well, with entitlements, we have this entitled mindset of, well, the system owes me and I'm part of that system. And the other part of it, I think, is what's driving a lot of it is a big sense of envy. We see a lot of wealth, even specifically in the West, where free grace has created this sort of free market, and we see the results of that, and we see that people are rewarded for their value efforts, their what kind of value they're bringing to the market, and so we get envious of that. And so instead of being thankful for what we have, we're driven by that envy and want to destroy that neighbor who has that sort of thing. So even like a big enemy within the Soviet Union were the kulaks. Kulak in Russian means fist. And so literally it means those who are like putting their fist down onto other people, or those who are being oppressors, right? And who the kulaks actually were basically small landowners. So they'd have an acre and a cow. And because they had an acre and a cow, that means I couldn't have an acre and a cow. So you are my oppressor. And so they would get dekulaked. So they would get their possessions stripped from them. They would get sent out into the open somewhere, and they'd have to restart. So my dad's grandparents were some of those people who had to restart their ownership a few times, and then they would restart again and get productive and have more, and they'd get stripped again. And so we have the same sort of envy driven here as well. So again, I think communism, socialism, it plays into our sinful nature of this entitled mindset and an envious heart.
Yeah, and because it's based on that, and you mentioned earlier Christ or chaos, because anything that's not rooted or built upon Christ is going to eventually devolve into chaos. Would you say that that's exactly and precisely why that communism has never worked?
Right. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I think I don't think you cannot have communism rooted in Christ. If you're rooted in Christ, you would be against what that is. Right. So because you submit to what Christ says that personal property ownership is good. Christ says that productivity is good. Christ says that people being rewarded for the value they bring is good. And even the sense of inequality, it almost seems like Jesus presents that inequality is also good, right? So in his parable about the talents or the 10 minas, when he says, somebody made a tenfold return or a threefold return, and so they got more. And then the one who buried his talent, it says take it from him and give it to the one who made 10, because he who has more will be given, and he who doesn't have even what he does have will be taken away from him. So it's like, well, that doesn't seem very equal. And so it's as if God presents this view that even inequality in our productive effort and how we are rewarded for that productive effort is also good. God wants to see that. And so I think if we are submitting to Christ, we would reject this sort of communistic, socialistic, entitled mindset. We'd want to actually be productive and then be rewarded according to our productivity.
Yeah. How did it, so maybe switching now towards the American side of things, how did it creep in? Because I'm familiar enough with like, what's his name? Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, and the Columbia School. What is the Columbia School called? The
I don't remember.
Yeah, Herbert Marcuse and those guys. Frankfurt School.
That's right.
Yeah, so it came in. It seems like it's been around in America for long enough, maybe even 100 years. How do you see its manifestation in the current dynamic in America? And how, and this is maybe a long form question, what do you see Trump doing so differently?
Yeah. How it came in, crept in. I do kind of look at three big things in the American history that maybe solidified where we are now. So the first being a government sort of land grab under even Teddy Roosevelt. So Teddy Roosevelt as a man seemed like a great guy, like a lot of things to aspire towards in what he was able to do. But some of his policies, I think, were unhelpful. And so specifically even his federal land grab with things like national parks, this sort of thing where as then states were formed, there's much more federal owned land on the western states than there is on the eastern states. And so this became normal that our federal government owns the land. And so less and less of personal productive property. People, as they moved on, weren't able to own and actually make that property. And that became normal. So it just became normal that the government owns the land, maybe similar even to what like Joseph did in Egypt, right? And so I think that's kind of one mind shift where we end up belonging, so to speak, to the federal government because they own the land. A second shift is with money, with Woodrow Wilson and the Federal Reserve, where now, even though the Federal Reserve as a private entity, but the government there owns our money as well. It owns our land, it owns our money. So everything that we operate under are IOUs back to the Federal Reserve that then we have to borrow money from them again to pay them back. And it's just this vicious cycle, which made slaves of us all. Right. And so this sort of approach to money as well. So government owns land, government owns money. And the third big shift was with John Dewey and public education. So government schools. Government now owns our kids and our mind. Right. So land, money, and mind belongs to the government. And so approaching those things and living through that over a few generations where that just becomes normal. And even I think that's why 2020 hit so many people across the head because this entity that was assumed to be such a important part of our life that we all trusted, we would never question. It was a heresy, so to speak, to question that sort of upper power. Ended up being visibly wicked and not doing what we thought was good. And because it became normal for us to assume that the federal government is good. And so I think those are just a few examples maybe of what ended up shifting the conversation, shifting the narrative towards that we all belong to that. And I think what Trump is doing, in some sense, not on everything, he's also in some ways a big government sort of guy. But in a lot of ways, he is driving towards productive property and more transparency and more freedom. right? And so even wanting to what they're doing with Doge and Elon Musk and all of that work, shining the light and exposing what the government has been doing and is doing, is helping to drive the narrative in the right direction. Hey, look, this is actually what's happening here with our money, with our education, with our land, right? So I think a lot of that sort of moving the ball in the right direction, moving the ball to the right end of the field, is what we're seeing and what is, I think, is good.
I also wonder too. Coming out of the World War II era, right? You've got. It feels like to me a sort of hatred of nationalism, because look what nationalism produced. I mean, that's sort of the thing. Like Hitler is the prototypical nationalist, and goodness, we don't want to love our nation because God forbid we become Hitler. Like that's sort of the irrationality of it. But it seems like because Trump is so America first, it feels like that's the reason why they're attaching this label of Hitler, fascist, or whatever else, because he's just nationalistic. Do you feel like that could even be a theme or a thread that's leading into this? Because it seems to me that globalism has been so foisted and pushed upon us, which I don't know if that's a communist virtue or not, but it's certainly anti-nationalistic, and that to me feels like at least part of the groundwork that's been laid for why Trump's presidency even is so revolutionary.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think that even on the bigger scale of the thing, where the post-war consensus in that way, where we have this maybe pseudo peace that ends up slowly harming all of us together, right? And so, Trump's agenda of America first, and I don't know, like nationalism, I think that word has a lot of baggage that ends up needing to get qualified over and over and over again. I don't know if there's a better word for it, but to have to care. Even a certain kind of maybe holy prejudice, right? Where, yes, I do care about my wife and kids first, right?
Yeah.
I'm concerned to make sure they're fed, make sure they're taken care of, they're protected. And then I work from that out. I don't work from out in. So it's my family, my neighbors, my town, my state, my nation, and then the world. So that sort of ordered love in that way, as even church history talks about, I think is important, and what we ought to not just value, but understand in the Bible, where we're supposed to love things in that order. And so taking care of our nation's needs, I think, is also important. So even, coming from a immigrant family, in some sense, I am Russian, right? But America is my home. America is my country. And so my allegiance is to our nation here. And so in that way, I care about America more than I do about Russia, because this is my home. And so I think that sort of approach threatens a lot of that globalistic narrative, and even what sort of schemes they have behind the counter. I mean, we don't always know. Again, some of what Trump and Elon are doing is exposing some of that. But I'm sure there's money connected to all of that and other sorts of power struggles, where there is still a selfish interest in the globalistic mechanism that individuals in seats of power have. But if we are to care about our family and our neighbors, well, my family lives here, my neighbors live here. I'm supposed to protect them in this nation.
Right. Yeah, and there's so much, and you're obviously more well versed in this than me, but it just seems like, I think Doug Wilson has said, if there is no God over the state, then the state becomes God, and that's certainly a central in any communist government or regime that I've ever studied. It's true in China. It was true in communist Russia. True in Venezuela and in these other places, and that is inherently anti-Christian. It's inherently going to lead that people, like you said, of Russia, persecuting Christians because we're the dissidents, we're the insurrectionists in that system because we threaten the state, and the state is God. It seems like to me that the modern Democratic Party's aversion to Christianity, or at least the the mockery of it, or the just the subtle ways that this has happened in America, is because we are, in their minds, the opposition. We're the opposition to state is God, and if we can either crush, water down, or desynthesize the church, then we will have a better go at doing our godless aim of erecting the state as our ultimate deity. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what? One of the charges that my grandpa kept getting thrown at him was slander against the government. That's what it was. And another one was maybe causing unrest in the civil sphere, right? And so by calling out the state, by calling out the government, even in the sense that no, actually Jesus is Lord, not you. That threatens that power system, and so we become the enemy. So yes, that was visibly demonstrated in the Soviet Union, in my own family's history, and it's visibly demonstrated here, right?
Yeah.
And so I think even the current, as it's gotten pushed even under Obama, or then even under Biden, more and more in that direction where COVID was a great example. You were not allowed to question the state's narrative.
The science.
And a lot of even private companies got behind that. That you dare not question any of this state science or media information, whatever that is, to the point of getting fined or censored. Right. So there were actual repercussions there. And so I think it's when we try to take away Jesus from his throne, Jesus not being Lord over it all, somebody still has to sit there. And so in our populace, in our demos, right, we put the state there. And so we all submit to this God as state situation. So blasphemy laws are there, heresy is there, and so we all have to live under that realm. So I think the Democratic Party for sure, and even a lot of the Republican Party. I think there's Christians, at least those who are sincere, who actually believe that Jesus is Lord and we're heralding that, are a threat to whether you're a blue or red in the political sphere. But we do have one party that is explicitly, visibly against Jesus and what he stands for, and another party that is maybe compromised. So the situation is different between the two.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I just think about, like, as you were talking, how the demon of statism is such a nasty one, because you're right. It really does trickle in, like almost like an octopus in its tentacles. It's trying to extend its tentacles into everything, like education for sure, the media for sure, all of the different various aspects of our life. I mean, the fact that we can't sum the legal code up, like the Bible has a wonderful legal code and great implications, and you can sum it up in the first 5 books. I don't even think we have enough libraries really to even hold the policies that are currently on the books. And that to me seems like another part of this state is God thing, because we will be Lord over every aspect of your life. Either Jesus is going to be Lord of your life, or the state's going to be Lord of your life. And ironically, it seems America in some ways has chosen that path for a long time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, all of the Soviet Union leaders were all considered representatives of the people, right? Their title was the General Secretary. It wasn't technically, king or lord or anything like that. It was General Secretary. It's a very official elected title, and so they were all advocated as, they were elected officials. And so when we talk about, the public or the populace, it quickly evolves into a few elites that end up setting the stage for what the people think. So even like in business, sometimes we'll have somebody come up and have some kind of a complaint and say, the people are saying, right? Or the people think, well, who are these people? And in the same way, the state officials claiming that they're representing the people are not really doing so. And so, again, some of Trump's agenda maybe even comes off a bit extreme to some extent. But this sort of populist uprising, I think, could, if it could lead in the wrong way. But it is at least exposing the few elites at the top that, no, you're actually not representing what the people want. Right.
Yeah, something I want to hit on in our time together is what do we do with this Trump presidency that we have? Because it seems to me that some really good things are happening. I've been overwhelmingly encouraged. Like, is Trump the Messiah? Obviously not. Is Trump? Is he a secularist in some ways? Yes. Like, is he giving? Like, if I were president, would I do things differently? Absolutely. But it seems like that we've had some incredible victories. I mean, just the fact that I'm thinking this will come out actually tomorrow, so this will be a quick turnaround. But as of today, the Epstein files are supposed to be released by the DOJ. That's great. Like, we're exposing corruption. So I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about what Christians are supposed to do with this 4 years that we've been given. But I also want to talk about, and maybe you've noticed this as well, I think sometimes Christians are allergic to winning. I think we don't know how to deal with it. I think that when we have victories at all, they're not good enough, and we turn our nose up. Well, look at who Trump put over, whatever her name is, Paula White.
That's right.
Maybe he's the Antichrist. And I'm like, guys, we don't have to win everything to win some things, and we can celebrate some of these things, and we have responsibility to act in a certain way. It is fundamentally, sorry, I'm getting passionate here. Good. It is fundamentally a better country today than if it were a Kamala Harris presidency. And we ought to be thankful for that and strategic about that, because if the enemy, if the world, the flesh, and the devil have a plan on how to corrupt the world, we ought to look at what's happened and say we ought to have a plan on how to actually build and work and labor for the next 3.9 years, and to be able to do something that's going to ensure long-term success, that this isn't just a 4-year flash in the pan.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, I think that there are even like Christians actively talking about where the Trump presidency is actually going to be worse, or is worse for Christians, for the church, because it's going to cause us to let our guard down, and we're not going to be out there working and fighting and doing the thing. In one sense, that's ridiculous. I mean, what do you mean it's going to be worse? Like, it's better to live under tyranny and suppression. I mean, ask any former communist or Russian living under the communist regime. No, it's not better. We like it here better. But in another sense, I do think there's some truth to that concern, where exactly what you're saying, where Christians are allergic to winning, or maybe don't know what to do with it. Right. And so I do think that victory is a different sort of burden, is a different sort of responsibility to be able to carry, that still requires faith and maturity, and maybe even more faith and maturity to do it right. So in the hallmark of faith in Hebrews 11, when it lists these, different characters, examples for us of people who lived by faith. And then at the end, it kind of goes into kind of a quick summary of all these different people. And it just starts listing people who were both persecuted, getting being sawn in two, being thrown in prison, and also those who conquered kingdoms and made nations flee, right? And so you see both sorts of approaches, or maybe even pictures of what faith does, what faith looks like. And faith knows how to lose, and faith knows how to win.
That's good.
And that sort of burden that I think victory brings. This is why a lot of not just Christians, but people in general get crushed under a lot of money or under a lot of fame or under a lot of power. Because these are things that are burdensome, that require maturity to be able to handle correctly. So when Paul writes, he had to learn to be content both in poverty and abundance. You have to learn how to handle abundance, what to do with it properly. And so it seems like even what God is doing with us individually, personally, is preparing for us that eternal weight of glory, like Paul writes in Corinthians, where it takes maturity for us to handle that if God was just to drop that eternal glory onto us now, it would crush us. We need to be able to grow up into maturity, grow up into faith. So for sure, it requires us to believe God more when we see things actually working. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I think maybe one distinction there that plays out is, Christians talk a lot about building and battling, and maybe even more so about battling. Like, that is the nature of the game, or the overall aroma is that we're very fighty. And I think over even the last couple of decades, this has escalated more. Right, we're very fighty. We're in battle, which is true, and that is good. We are called to be on guard. Our enemy is like a lion, prowling, seeking whom to devour. We're supposed to not be not just tame, but not naive, right? But I think the battle is still a means. It's not the end. The end that we're going towards is an eternal building project, right? Yeah. And so we're going to be building and building. And even here, we battle because something is in the way of us building. Our goal is to build, is to make progress, is to advance. And then something is in the way of that advancement effort, so we battle. So we have to get rid of that thing that's in the way of Christ's glory. But then we move forward. And I think a lot of Christians maybe are even so used to battling, that's all they know how to do, that when the battle is not there, they kind of get lost and maybe even shrink back. So I think under Trump's 4 years here, 3.9 years, like you said, if we are going to be battling less than we would have been under Kamala, or we were under Biden, or under Obama, right. Then we need to be doubling down in our building effort. We need to run that much harder, right? So again, what does faith look like when the obstacle is not there, when the gate is open? Faith does not sit down. Faith runs through the gate. The door is open, you run through, and that takes faith to do as well. And so I think that's what more and more Christians need to wake up towards. What is your context to understand the times? Is this a season of battle? Is this a season of building? And even if it is battle, don't forget that you're still building. This battle is just something that's in the way that you're building on the other side of.
Yeah, that's so good. And I hadn't thought about it in those terms before, but it really is knowing what to do with the times you've been given. Kind of like Gandalf says to Frodo, it's knowing what to do with the times one is given. It really does feel like that this battle mentality that you're mentioning has been the single gear in the transmission of the church, mm-hmm. and along with that is an expectation of losing.
Right,
we're always battling, but we're ever losing.
Right, it's not actually going to work. Right,
right, and thank God that Jesus said, "I will build my church."
That's right,
and the gates of hell will not stand against it, because that sort of mentality would ensure that whatever organization it was, like imagine if Apple had that mentality, we're always going to fight, but we're never going to win. Like,
right. Well, I mean, my day job is a business owner. I own businesses, I manage them, I build them. It makes no sense for me to have a losing mindset. Like, why would I be doing anything that I'm doing if I don't think I'm going to be able to actually accomplish this thing, right? And so I do think that in some way, even those Christians who maybe have a winning mindset in the long run do kind of forget about the trees for the forest. So maybe in reverse, where we keep focusing on these big aspirations or visions. It'd be great. It's going to be so great when all this kind of stuff happens. But what about what the work that's right in front of you now? Like, what are you doing with that to actually advance and make progress in? So, like, if your work is a business owner, What are you doing to make your business better, to be able to be more profitable, to be able to serve your customers better? It's not just about some distant future win, but right in front of you. Win today. Win this week,
That's so good. And I think that that's really important, what you just said, because I do think that if there is this duality or this spectrum between building and battling, which is really helpful categories, I do think that a Trump presidency is an opportunity for us to lay down our swords and to pick up our hammers. I really believe that we've been given a gift by God as the church to not pay attention. I mean, we can pay attention obviously to what's going on in Washington, but to not pay attention to it in the sense of it's a distraction. I think that we really as the church have a great opportunity. We've got more religious freedom now under Trump than we would have under Harris. It's time for us to build some infrastructure that will actually last and that will bring about more human flourishing, that will bring about more gospel presentations that actually could resurrect America as the nation that's preaching the gospel to the ends of the earth, like it's been for so long.
Right.
I really resonate with what you're saying. So now maybe what we need to talk about, if we're both in agreement that this is a opportunity to build, we have 4 years. How do we build? What do we build? And maybe let's differentiate between the church itself as organization and the Christians as what do we do in our vocations, in our life, in our homes, in our neighborhoods? What can we be doing for the next 4 years to build in this gift of a period that God has given us?
Yeah, for sure. It's really good. Yeah, I agree with you that I see this as God's grace. And it's the sort of grace that he has entrusted us with. We are to carry this grace and to advance it, right? So it's not just grace to kind of put things under the rug, brush things away and forget about it, but in the sense of God's kindness leads us to repentance, right? This is God being kind to us. God is being very gracious. And this is him giving us a talent. He is entrusting us with a mina. And what are we going to do with it? Are we going to bring a return back to our master, or are we going to bury it and not do anything with it? Yeah. And so there's three things that come to mind of, what do we actually do? How do we actually, steward this mina and bring a return? The first, I think, is in the category of people. So with our relationships, with our family, our close relationships, our local church, our city community, and then extended beyond to that network, to be able to build those networks, make those networks stronger. Where there is sin involved in your household, where there's sin involved in your church, get that dealt with. You have an opportunity to deal with that here. The enemy has looked away, so strengthen your internal troops, strengthen those connections, and then build those networks outside of just your local church as well, starting and flowing from the inside out, to build those relationships and meet new people to strengthen that again. Because the church history will ebb and flow, and so at one point there's going to be a season of battle, and we would be that much more ready for it if we have stronger relationships with our people, and if we meet more people who are like-minded in us in that way.
That's so I think good.
People is the first category. Care about what are you doing to make sure that those relationships are holy and dealt with, and so that you can move forward in that way. The second category comes to mind is productivity, to actually do the work, to not miss, like I said, the trees for the forest. So a lot of Christians, even those who are optimistic, have this kind of grandeur vision for the future, but they neglect what's in front of them today. Yeah. And so to not miss that, but to do the work, a lot of people can talk big, but most people don't actually work big. Do the work today and make it big today. How can you be more productive? How can you, again, make a 10x return on that mina that you got, whatever that is? And so, again, not just talking about what would be great to do, but doubling down your effort. And that requires a certain attention to detail, a certain kind of attention to actually, care about maybe getting the dirt under your fingernails, metaphorically and maybe even literally. What does it look like to do the work to build up your business, to get good at a trade, to learn skills that will be productive, whatever that is, whether it is working a hammer or writing or film production or content creation, whatever that is. Get good at that work. Be productive. So I think people, productivity, and the third one that comes to mind is profit. So figure out how to make a return on that work that you're doing. And in one sense, I think profit looks differently, but in a big way also, I think it is we should hear that very tangibly. Make some money. This will serve you in a lot of different ways. Whether, again, it is to be able to have resources for the next battle season later, be able to have resources as you network and meet more people so you could build more things together, or even resources for your own household, for your children and your children's children. A righteous man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. So to be thinking about it that way, if you've given a 4-year sprint or time to sprint, run hard. So connect with people, do a lot of good work, and make some good money for you to be able to then get into the next season, whatever that looks like. I think these are maybe some practical things that come to mind for us to be able to do something with.
That's so good too. And remembering, like, there's going to be some, maybe not watching this show because we talk like this a lot, but there's going to be some who maybe would see this and say, yeah, but those things are secular. Those things are not Christian. Those things aren't glorifying to God. And I think what you said earlier in the episode, in the beginning of this conversation, is learning how to see all of life under the lordship of Jesus Christ. My job can be used as a glory to Christ, not just as a means to an end. I think that's so important to see that my productivity, like, I think about this. How can I wake up earlier? How can I improve my quality of sleep so that I can get less of it so that I can do more? I think about this stuff all the time because at 41, I don't have many productive years left. I mean, maybe I have 30 productive years left. What am I going to do for Jesus? Everything's going to soon be past, as C.T. Studd once said. All things will soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. And that's not just preaching sermons. Right. And that's not just doing Bible studies. That's building, like you're saying. I love it so much. And the prophet, one idea to add to this is, how can the church possibly gain ground if we don't have money to be able to build the kind of foundation that will last? Like, I live in Massachusetts. I just saw a video that the average person, their average family of 4, needs about $300,000 a year just in order to live comfortable. Mm-hmm. We have a church that meets in a warehouse space because we don't have a stone cathedral. We couldn't possibly afford a stone cathedral. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I think that could be a beautiful glory for the kingdom is if Christians got an idea of, I'm going to make more money on purpose so that we can build cathedrals again, so that we can build publishing companies that produce gospel material. Like, I'm going to work my tail off so that the kingdom of Jesus moves forward. Like, I would love to see that mentality shift in the church, because we should be, as Christians, the best business owners, the best scientists, the best musicians, the best everything.
Right. Yeah. The Bible says money answers everything. Right. So it does have that sort of category, we at least that we need to consider. And so like you see this in church history, where a lot of church movements, when the Spirit would move, there would also be very practical considerations of somebody's wallet funding this whole endeavor.
Yeah,
that was inescapable. That was always God provided for that, and so it's not something we need to be anxious about or maybe fussy about. But to have that sort of category that, yes, we actually need money to be able to do the work as well. And I think even beyond just the church context, things like you're talking about, art and science, and we need to get good at that. A lot of those things in church history were also funded by somebody. So somebody paid for Michelangelo's stuff. I mean, it was the the Catholic Church in that sense. But again, even like Newton and his science, there was a certain kind of money that allowed him to do that. Whether that was a patron funding that individual, or even himself being able to have the sort of maybe leisure, if I could use that word, to be able to figure this stuff out, to learn and study and get good at whatever that is, that all requires money. But the thing with money, though, is that in the Christian context, in our capitalistic free market context, money comes because we provide value to somebody else, right? And so it is a result of our good works. Because some customer really valued what we had. And the more value we give to that person, or the more people we give value to, the more money becomes as a result. So money is also in that sort of context is an incentive to do more good for those customers, for those people. And so you can't, if you start trying to make money, you can't do that without first providing value to somebody else. So even the process of money making requires you to have more good works, to think about how can I serve more people.
Right. Money flows towards value. It flows towards life, actually.
Right. Right.
So I even think about that, how that's a connection to what you said earlier about the cultural mandate. As Christians, we are to cultivate life on earth, more life. Our businesses, our jobs, our parenting, our everything is supposed to cultivate and bring more life. And what generally happens is life brings value, value brings resources, resources begets and should beget more life. So it should be a cyclical process. And I think the one thing, man, you've said so many good things, but the thing that I'm really stuck with is how we need to learn how to steward victory well. Mm-hmm. We've expected battling and losing. We need to learn in this season how to steward actually pushing back the gates and learning how to win and learning how to bear the burden of that and bear it well.
Right. Yes, that's right. For sure. I think the more we learn to do that, the more victory then we're able to handle, that then God could entrust us with. So, he disciplines us and instructs us as a father would his children, and he gives us what we can handle. And so we have been able to handle thus far so much. So he gives it to us. As we learn and mature more, I also think, whether it's our lifetime or just Christians and the church in general, grows and matures, and we learn from the past, and we're not dealing maybe with the same exact theological questions that we had before, and even application questions. We could look back. So if we're the ones who are learning this and figuring this out, our kids or grandkids come back and don't have to remake the wheel again. They're able then to advance further and gain more ground. So as we learn to handle this level of whatever that looks like, victory, money, glory, whatever it is, then God is able to entrust us with more of that for us to do more good works with.
Amen. Amen. Brother, this has been great, and I hope that this has at least whetted the appetite of folks who are starting to think this way, and even to maybe, who knows how many people might be already contemplating business ownership or things like that. I hope that this has at least whetted the appetite of that. Tell us where we can find you. Where are you? Are you writing? Are you blogging? Are you a podcast? Like, where can we follow along with you and keep learning with you?
Yeah. You could check me out on my website is philipkulishov.com. That just has a few of the things that I'm talking about here. That'll also link you to my business podcast, Business 300. It's 300 seconds about business. So I release 2 episodes a week. Each episode is under 5 minutes long. And that's specifically talking about business ownership, business management, kind of all things, training up owners and managers to build good businesses. And so it's something that I would have found, I think, valuable as I was entering the business world and learning how to advance that. And so business people are busy, so I can't give them another very long podcast. I just give it to them in short snippets.
They have the broadcast for that.
That's correct. Yes, there you go. And then on X, Cool Phil, so my KUL, like my last name, and then PHIL. You could find me there. But so that's a few of the places where I'm at.
Fantastic. Hey, I wish we had more time because like we've just barely touched like a little a rock skipping across the pond.
Yeah,
but, like,
this was fun.
Yeah, I've got to talk to you more, even offline, or have you back on again, because this is good, and I think that we, like you said, we have a very unique opportunity right now. So let's do it to the glory of God.
Right. Amen.
Amen. Well, brother, thank you so much for being on, and we'll see you again next time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Been a delight.
Absolutely. God bless you, brother.
Thank you so much for watching this interview. Thank you for being a part of this channel. Some ways that you can support this channel is go to prodthesheep.com. That's our merchandise store. That's where we're making all sorts of different cool and interesting t-shirts about postmillennialism, about defeating dispensationalism, and everything in between. So go check out that store. Also, if you want to support this show and make sure that we can do this more and reach more people and continue to tell more people about the hope that we have in Christ, well, then sign up as a member of this show. We have 3 membership levels. We have the Insiders, the Defenders, and the Prod Squad. You can go on our YouTube channel and check out what each of those mean. Until next time, God richly bless you, and we'll see you next week as we get back to our Revelation series on the PRODCAST. Now get out of here.